At absolute long last, we finally returned to Porterverse Workbench. It has been a long time since the last episode of this series. The reason being that earlier this year my house needed mold remediation, and then right before that was finished, my house partially flooded. Thankfully everything is all sorted out right now and the house is all back together. But it did take a long time until I finished it up and I took time away from the series, and I do apologize for that. But we are now back, and Porterverse Workbench can finally return after so long. We will be focusing on the one and only James the Red Engine. James is one of the very few Thomas characters to have never been tarnished by any of the eras the show went through. Even the current All Engines Go era seems to be treating him pretty well, I'd say. Naturally, James' consistency throughout the decades has led him to become a fan favorite. He is certainly in my personal top 10. Looking at this model, you notice that James is looking a little different from his official design. Why did I go with the N class instead of the class 28, you ask? Well, I shall get into that now. Let's dive into the Porterverse backstory of James the Red Engine. Following the end of World War I, several N-class moguls became overstocked and were put up for sale. Many of these were kits meant to be assembled by the buyers. James was one of these kits. On Sodor, the Tidmouth, Wellsworth, and Brendam Light Railway figured having a kit on hand just in case wouldn't hurt, and so they purchased one kit in 1918. This N-class kit will go unused for several years. The formation of the NWR did lead to some hope for this N-class kit being built, but the early director at the time, Fergus Regaby, insisted on taking loan engines, most of which from the railway he previously worked with. When he was ultimately removed from power in 1924, Thomas I, the new director of the railway, ordered the N-class kit to be built at once. Construction was completed in early 1925. However, due to a robbery at the works, the metal brake blocks were substituted with wooden ones. This went as well as you'd expect. The newly built James crashed only a week after entering service. His brake blocks caught fire while pulling a goods train, and he came up the tracks at a curve. He was quickly saved by one Thomas' tank engine, however, and was brought back to the works for repairs. The charred remains of his wooden brake blocks were removed and replaced with stronger metal ones. He was also repainted to his iconic red livery. James will return to service by the summer of 1925, and will go on to have as many character arcs as the year went on. This is where you'll find James today, as he happily works on the island of Sodor. James's model has had quite the journey over the last few months. He was originally made from a Bachmann James, which was simply repainted. I took a chunk off my middle finger for this model, and it wound up being kind of shit. After I clear coated it, I noticed that the clear coating fogged up and made it look like it was snowed on. That wasn't the biggest fault, however. The biggest fault was its size. It was around a third shorter than my Edward model. Yikes. So I went back to the drawing board, as having Edward, the supposed smaller engine, be bigger than James, the quote-unquote big engine, just didn't seem right to me. While on the drawing board, I thought about what I could make James out of, as I worked on other models in the meantime. After a good few months of James just sitting in the back burner, I eventually landed on using the N-class. Timeline-wise, it did make sense, and it was also used for the Day Out with Thomas events as well, so figured it would work, and that's what I went with. Once the model arrived, I got to work at once. Painting process was pretty simple: primer, and then several coats of red. I was very careful in my color selection this time. One of the biggest problems I had on my original James model was that there was too much blue on it, as I wanted to keep a unified all blue lining instead of having gold boiler bands and then black or blue lining, but I also didn't want to have it overpowering the other colors. For the main red color, I used Apple Barrel's Flag Red. This is different from the red I used for the running boards of my engines, as I found that Apple Barrel's bright red is rather difficult to work with when brushing on. I also wanted a slightly darker shade of red to make the running board stand out more from the body. I know this isn't really a huge deal, but it is something I prefer with my models. And the flag red paint actually worked really well, and brushed on super easily. After all the red was applied, I then went in with the blue. I took a page out of the Unlucky Tugs book and gave him all blue lining as opposed to the blue and gold, or gold and black in this case, like in the TV series and the railway series. I honestly never liked when an engine has more than one color lining in certain sections. Seems kinda sloppy in my opinion. The blue was carefully applied with toothpicks on the body. The boiler banding was molded on, so that was pretty easy, just go over that. I also used toothpicks to go over the edges of these smoke deflectors with a little bit of the blue, which is quite the chef's kiss on this model, I think. It just really unifies the whole thing. I chose the N-Class with the smoke deflectors as I feel that would play into James's ego, as he will be one of the only engines with smoke deflectors. The 5s on the tender were also achieved with toothpicks. Pretty tedious, yet it came out pretty good, I'd say. The gold on his dome was achieved with a gold Sharpie. I also made this pipe thing that goes from the dome on the sides and made that gold, as I feel like it gives him a little more of a pop of the colors, as I didn't necessarily want to keep it blue. Plus there's a good middle ground, at least he has one technically boiler banding that's gold. Kinda like it. Anyways, after that, I went in with silver Sharpie for the handrails and the smokebox door. I also painted over the number board in red. I'm not sure if I'm going to add a number to this, but I feel like it does make it stand out a little bit more so I haven't just blacked out. Following various cleanup work with black paint all around, I gave the bottle a matte clear coat. After a day of drying, James was officially done. I am very happy with the end result. Just looks so right, you know? Just really stands out in a way that's very James, I'd say. If you're wondering what happened to the original James model, well, I ended up repurposing a tender to be an auxiliary tender for my tank engines. The body will most likely be cannibalized for parts, as I only plan to make my James model using N-Class from now on. Yep, you heard that right, there's going to be more than one James model. I'm actually working on it right now. It won't be covered for a while though, but I suppose a little peek wouldn't hurt. Thank you all very much for watching this episode of Porterverse Workbench, and I shall see you all same time next week.